What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
We welcome our listener back tonight for another hermetically sealed episode of Notes from an Artist. My name is Tom Semioli. I am your co-host along with my airtight colleague, David C. Gross. David, say hello to our listener.
Hello, Karen. How are you tonight? I'm back in my condominium.
Our guest tonight is a musical polymath, David. Now, the word polymath is a Greek term for an individual whose knowledge spans a substantial number of subjects. And Elliott Sharp is with us this evening.
Yes, he is. And how sharp is he? What a great guy. I mean, really. And it's funny, too, because I really expected that we were going to talk about some of the more avant-garde things that he did. But we were steeped in the blues, my man.
Yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, his primary instrument is guitar, and his work as a recording and performing artist and composer spans contemporary classical music to jazz to blues. But yeah, for some reason, we got hooked on the blues tonight.
I have no idea why. Could be something called $20 bill.
That's not $2 bill.
Send me the bill.
Anywho, we will certainly have him back on the show to discuss his classical and avant-garde endeavors. You just can't contain Elliott Sharp in one episode. And of course, as always, at the conclusion of our discussion, we will have the Elliott Sharp playlist for our listener, and we'll discuss that when we bid fondue to Elliott. And let's get on with the show. But first, David, we have to do our platform plugs. You, the audience member. And who is that audience member again, David?
That's Karen.
Hey,
At least
Karen.
That's the only one we know of.
Karen, you may be listening to David and myself every Monday night on Cygnus Internet Radio. That is CYGNUS. You can dial that up on the internet browser of your choice. You, the audience member, may be listening to us on our Notes from an Artist podcast, which is streaming this very moment on Apple and wherever podcasts are podded. You can go behind the scenes with Notes from an Artist on our Notes from an Artist YouTube page. We have lots of great videos on that page. And be sure to log into www.notesfromanartist.com to keep up with whatever David and I are doing at any given moment. So let's bring him on. Welcome, Elliott Sharp. Elliott, welcome to the show. Looking good. Where are we talking to you from?
I'm in my studio in the East Village in Manhattan.
Oh, I'm not too far from you. I'm on the Upper East Side.
Okay,
near Mayor Adams. And David, where are you, David? You're in a very strange place.
I'm in a place called Connecticut in Litchfield County, where there are still more llamas and cows than people, so it's nice. I have a couple of funny stories to tell you. 33 years ago, when I was still dating my wife. Now we don't date anymore. No, seriously. We were at the knitting factory. I forget who was playing, but I remarked to her, I go, Nancy, did you hear that sharp 9 part? And from the back of that little small room came this voice going, what is this? Name that chord? Do you know who that somebody was? You.
Well, there you go. Well, of course, if it wasn't a sharp 9 chord, I probably wouldn't have recognized it.
We did that Sonny Chirac benefit in the big room.
Yeah, no, I remember it very well. It's to Bob Musso playing Dick Dogs.
That's right. Tom, why don't we introduce
our audience member to Elliott Sharp? He is a composer. He is a multi-instrumentalist, though he is most closely associated with the guitar. He is a recording and performing artist. He's a collaborator. He's a band leader. He's an educator. He's a visual artist. He's an author. He is the world's most interesting man, Dave.
Well, I don't know about that. Talk to my kids about that. And I'm a dad.
And he's a dad. We don't know if he drinks Dos Equis. Well, welcome to the show, Elliott. You have a new single out, whatever a single means in the 21st century, in the 24th year in the 21st century, $20 bill with Eric Mingus, with your ensemble Terraplane. Well, what is the significance of the name Terraplane? I was always curious.
Well, of course, the inspiration came from Robert Johnson's Terraplane Blues. And then I began to investigate, and learned about the Hudson Terraplane. But also, I was a sci-fi buff I think I learned to read so I could read sci-fi. Growing up in the 50s, space age, I thought I was going to be a scientist, but sci-fi resonated a lot more with me because it was so completely speculative. The whole idea that you could create an entirely different reality that had some connection, however tenuous, to science. It was to me like philosophy, like studying Spinoza or any of the other great thinkers. And I've been playing blues since I first picked up a guitar, because the first stuff I heard that really grabbed me was the Yardbirds and the Rolling Stones. Jeff Beck, for me, was one of the greatest, still is. I had the pleasure of meeting him, if only briefly, back in 1990 at a NAMM show in LA. He wasn't too happy to be there, but we had a few nice words. Really just an incredibly great musician. And when I got an electric guitar in 1968, the first thing I tried to do, remember I was a science geek, so I was building fuzz boxes and ring modulator pedals. And first thing I tried to learn was his solo from Mr. You're a Better Man Than I, which is still, to me, one of the most beautifully constructed guitar solos. And then Jimi Hendrix came along, of course, and that blew that wide open. So I was pursuing parallel paths, one to become a scientist and one to become a guitar player. Now, I had a National Science Foundation grant summer 1968 to be a scientist's assistant. I was a Ford Future Scientist of America. Well, little did I realize that scientists in those days were all trying to grub money from the Defense Department. And I was already very much involved in anti-Vietnam War activity as a 17-year-old about to enter the draft pool. And I said, science is not, I love science. I love the idea of investigation of the natural and the unnatural world. But I also got a gig as a DJ on the radio station, midnight to 4 a.m. 1968 was a great year for all kinds of music. And I just was very, very happy to dig into the library there at WRCT and play anything I could find that appealed to me, which was a lot of stuff, both on the weirder end of the spectrum and also, country blues, Indian music, African music, Indonesian music, especially, all of it. It was really great. At the same time, as I said, I was trying to play blues. The Yardbirds, Rolling Stones, John Mayall got me into it, but pretty quickly I discovered the real guys. Sam Goody's bargain store, I'm trying to remember where it was, on 46th Street, maybe.
49th, right off 8th Avenue. I work there.
Yeah. When I skipped school, hitchhiked down to the city for 99 cents, get the Howlin' Wolf Rockin' Chair album, the Muddy Waters collections, Real Folk Blues, everything. I had piles of great LPs. And one of the first things I did was take my father's really crappy harmony guitar that strings this high and lay it on my lap and took one of my test tubes, since there weren't a lot of bottles of cheap wine, in my parents' house, but took my test tube and was trying to figure out how to play country slide blues. And that was really when I went to university in the fall of 69 to Cornell to study anthropology, ostensibly. I sold my electric guitar, kicked myself for that, had a beautiful old Fender Blackface Pro reverb and a Hagstrom 3, but got a Gibson L48 in trade for those, and archtop, really nice guitar, and was playing blues in coffee houses then until I got the electric disease again. I do tend to digress a lot, as
That's
you may
fine.
have.
That's the name of the show.
But I do feel there's
a
method to this digression. Blues has always been there. When I was living in this house, this apartment crash pad in Ithaca when I was a student there, it was like Action Central. We were right on Eddy Street. I don't know if either of you have been to Ithaca, but Eddy Street was one of the main drags off the Cornell campus. And our apartment, because a few of us are musicians, was like Action Central. We always had people crashing there and jamming 20 hours a day in the front room. We had a bunch of equipment there. John McDuffie from the Blues Project was on the lam from some legal problems in New York, so he was crashing in our place for a while. And all kinds of people. And one of my closest friends still from those days is a guitarist named Al Katz, Kaatz, who has played with Etta James, played with Cajun Fiddler, Doug Kershaw. He played with Doug Kershaw for a while. He played with Bonnie Bramlett. Al's a great guitar player and a dear friend. And he said, as I was trying to find my way into electric guitar, he said, listen to B.B. King. And I did. And I was always taken with Hubert Sumlin, even though I didn't know who he was. Musicians were not credited. I finally found out who Hubert was and then tried to find as much as I could. In 1983, a girlfriend and I went to visit Chicago, a friend of hers there, and I saw that Hubert was playing evening, splitting a night with Lefty Diz at some little dive in the north part of town. And so I met Hubert, a sweet guy. I didn't want to bug him, but we talked about guitars a little bit and got to hear him play, got to stand like right next to him. Later, through the singer Queen Esther in New York, she said, hey, I sang with Hubert in Austin and his manager is here in Brooklyn. Esther was singing with Terraplane. Do you want to back up Hubert? I jumped at the chance. It was incredible. So we backed him up, and that led to me producing some records of his and him joining Terraplane for a bunch of tours. We brought him to Europe, to Italy and France and England and Germany. Where else? We did a bunch of recordings. He'd come over to my studio here, and he loved to drink coffee, keep making espressos, and he'd keep drinking them. Very happy, drink coffee. Goya Les Paul, that's, a lawsuit guitar. They were made in Japan, but imported by Hagstrom or Vox. I don't know what the whole business deal was, but they were great Les Pauls. It was a Les Paul Deluxe with mini humbuckers and weighed nothing, like 7.5 pounds. And Hubert loved that guitar. I have some great pictures of Hubert sitting here on the couch playing that guitar. He tracked a bunch of solos with it.
You bring up Hagstroms. They were sort of the de rigueur instrument of the 60s. I had their 8-string bass. We were able to bring it to Van Cortlandt Park and let people ski off it because the action was probably worse than your acoustic.
Yeah, no, I'm really lucky with mine. And it's the bass that the parts to Spanish Castle Magic were played on in the second Hendrix record,
Right. In Axis, yeah. Tony Sales had one, and he went to the same prep school I did on 70th Street on the East Side. And he and his brother, they were playing in a couple of bands there, so I saw him using that. But you were talking about sci-fi.
Weren't they backing Todd Rundgren for a while?
Yeah, but that was a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, they had their own sort of like a Dino Desi and Billy band in the 60s called Tony and the Tigers.
Okay, I remember that.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the Yardbirds because I actually went to the Hullabaloo show where they were playing. I met Jeff only because I was backstage, but kind of cool. Nonetheless, as a kid reading sci-fi, I think the 50s was probably the greatest years for terrible science fiction movies that we all loved.
I liked Kronos, that giant machine. I think they made a very low budget in Mexico. It's funny, when I wrote a piece for Kronos String Quartet, I asked him, did you get the name from that science fiction film? David Harrington said, no, I didn't even know that film existed. I wish we had named it after that. Oh, man, there's some of the Mysterians. All the Japanese ones were really great.
Oh, the Mysterians were great. Yeah. Rodin,
of course. Yeah, no, that was a great year. And the books, I got turned on to Philip K. Dick early on. And as I went back to read him later, I realized how deep an author he was. And I found out about all of his non-science fiction writing from the 50s. He always had a certain thread of ideas running through all of his books,
Yes.
About empathy. That's like the key theme in Blade Runner.
Which really seems to be happening now. I needed a history book. It was called Glory Road, about the Civil War. And I was homesick, and my mom brought home Glory Road by Robert Heinlein. I was pleased, but I was late with the homework assignment.
Yeah, right. Heinlein is, to me, a mixed pleasure because he was a brilliant writer, but his politics are very kind of authoritarian right-wing,
Yeah, I think he was looking at the George Orwell school of...
Yeah, but he seemed to endorse it. I mean, that's the weird thing about it.
I did not know.
Yeah. Talking about the blues, obviously, rhythmically and harmonically, you're working in a familiar format. Blues is a universal language, but you took it outside a little bit. Was this ensemble accepted, do you feel, by the blues community, which not always as flexible as you might expect?
Not here in the U.S., no. We did a bunch of records for different labels, and they got much more play in Europe. And in Europe, we would play big festivals, play to 5,000 people, play big clubs, and hugely enthusiastic response. And here, hardly able to get booked.
David and I had two British musicians on. You might have heard of. We had Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones, obviously, and Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols. Sure. And they both talked about their love of American blues. And yes, they brought the blues back to us because we didn't know we had it in our own country until the Stones came ashore in 1964. So it's not unusual that blues would be accepted overseas than it is here.
Yeah, well, the language that I'm operating in is fairly marginal, I would say. I've always been off in my own corner doing things that interest me, and whether they interest anyone else. Sometimes yes, sometimes I've resonated with some aspect of the zeitgeist and sometimes not. But to me, blues was always a very sonically very forward-reaching music. I mean, you listen to hear Pat Hare, the things he was doing, in the early 50s with distortion, and Hubert's whole language is just like, I mean, without Hubert, his DNA is there, and Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix, Clapton, Robbie Robertson, all these guys, Jimmy Page. Where would they be without Hubert? Otis Rush, also, you listen to his tracks from the 50s, very, very vocalized. And that's the thing that always struck me, is that the language of the guitar that they used was very Dionysian. I mean, I love Jim Hall and Wes Montgomery. What I really resonate with is, the hot guitar tone, hearing Albert Collins or Otis Rush, or Albert King. I mean, the guitar is the parallel voice, like the Greek chorus to their singing, or the lead voice sometimes, very often.
Is there anything you can't do with a 1-4-5 progression? I mean, you mentioned those artists, but I'll add to the mix Depeche Mode and Daft Punk and Marilyn Manson. You hear the blues in their music, and their blues progression.
Sure, absolutely. So, do you know who Charlie Kyle is? In fact, he's a neighbor of yours up in...
okay, not familiar, but go ahead.
Charlie is a musicologist. He was my professor and my mentor when I was in Buffalo in graduate school, one of the professors there. Charlie wrote a book called Urban Blues, which is a very important study of blues culture. It was written in like 1966, 67, I think, focused on B.B. King. That's how I first heard about him. When I got to Buffalo, I took his course, and I found out, because I had studied with Roswell Rudd, the great jazz trombonist, arranger, and improviser, that he and Charlie are first cousins. Well, Roswell's no longer with us, but Charlie is in his 80s, and he lives up near you there in Connecticut. And Charlie brought up some really interesting points about the history of the blues, that these 1-4-5 progressions can be sourced to Elizabethan music, the 12 bars and the 1-4-5. I mean, the blues that I always dug was the one, just hanging on the one, because that's the most African of all of them. And you hear a lot of West African and North African music, and it's boogie, totally. Yeah. And we were trying to capture, like, the fife and drum music of Othar Turner, and a lot of that music that was found by Lomax. Well, it was there. He didn't find it, but it was there. He brought it out to the larger world. And that's about the most Africanized American music there is. I got to split some sets with Othar Turner's band. Othar was already gone, but his granddaughter Sade was leading the fife and drum band. And man, it was incredible to hear them and to hang out with them and talk. I was trying to get them to be booked by my agent to get them to the European jazz festivals, because they'd never been to Europe. And I know people would go crazy for them there.
Wow, interesting.
You're right about the one chord. And if you think about it, so much of, let's say, Miles' electric period on up really has to do with the one chord, and in essence playing on the one as well.
As George Clinton would say,
yeah.
We had Ben Neal on, and we were talking about song structure. At this point, it seems that people are starting to create with beats. Now, you can look at that. I have a 19-year-old daughter, so I have a certain view on some of that material.
Yep.
But you can look at it from the idea, well, yeah, it makes sense that everything's built from the beat. And so much of the music is really one chordal. I wouldn't say one dimensional, but one chordal. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Banish that 4 chord, get rid of the 5.
Well, it's the whole thing about creating the trance and the ecstasy. The one chord is ideal for that. And I don't even think of it as like the beat, but I see the beat as a function of the greater drone, because sometimes drones coalesce and they form beats, internal beats, because of difference tones, and you hear beats emerging from a complex drone.
Right.
It's funny. I'm working on a new book called Feedback, and touch upon a lot of this stuff. Just going back to Miles, the story about how he proposed what he was going to do with On the Corner to Teo Macero. He said, Teo, I want to talk about the new record, and he invited him to meet him at this restaurant on the corner of Amsterdam and 125th. So they're sitting there in this Indian restaurant on the corner, and the whole 125th Street Harlem action is happening outside, and the Indian music is playing in the restaurant. And he says to Teo, what do you think? And it took Teo a second to get it, but that's On the Corner, that mixture of Indian drone.
Oh, that is fantastic. But it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And then you can even look at the album cover and see how that.
Now I understand it a little more.
Totally.
All right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, that's great.
Badal Roy was working at their restaurant. That I'm not sure about. But going back to $20 bill, I mean, that of course goes to some other chords, but it hangs on. I see it coming out of Tommy Johnson, Howlin' Wolf. And by the way, I'm completely ecstatic about being on Delmar, because it was such an important label for me. All those great records, both in blues and also the early avant-garde records of Anthony Braxton and Wadada, Leo Smith and Leroy Jenkins. I ate those.
For Alto is like one of my favorite records of all time. And think about it. in 69 that came out, and all of a sudden you're hearing this. And I even have his writings, those Trillium writings, really fabulous books, fabulous stuff. And it's always been interesting to me how the avant-garde, which is really not so avant-garde when you get comfortable with it. I think growing up in New York, you're sort of hearing that no matter what, which is essentially what Miles was getting to with that metaphor. Yeah,
and all of it. Amiri Baraka, back when he was Leroy Jones and wrote that book Black Music, collection of writing, and he talks about Cecil and Ornette, and even Sonny Rollins was going through an avant-garde period with East Broadway Rundown. He says, it's never very far away from the blues. With Albert Ayler, you can hear the gospel influence. And I always took that to heart. Even Xenakis, for me, if you're familiar with Xenakis's music,
sure,
it's a very cosmic blues, pure noise, but it's definitely passionate music. And that's the key to it, passion. I like cool music, but I'm moved by music that has passion in it, whether it's quote unquote avant-garde or, country blues. To me, it's a continuity between all of them. I have to say, Anthony and Braxton and I have talked about doing something together, met each other on a number of occasions over the years, and we were at a festival together in San Francisco a couple of years ago. And it would be one of my great goals in life to play together with Anthony. I think it would be pretty fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Really, that record, for me, I essentially picked up all those other records you were talking about, because at that point, Delmark became the go-to. Oh, I know I'm going to get good stuff from this. And then, of course, working at both Sam Goody and the Record Hunter, I had BYG and things like that.
One of my first jazz records I bought was Sonny Chiroc's Monkey Pocky Boo.
Monkey Pocky, yeah.
Good start.
I was working with he and Linda, the album that was on Atco, really, Paradise, and stuff. So,
Sonny was not.
I didn't understand it, Elliott. I really didn't. It was sort of, what are you doing? I'm trying to lay down a groove. Steve Jordan was playing drums. That's kind of funny.
Really? Steve's the drummer on Paradise?
No, Buddy Williams was the drummer on it, but we were in the touring band.
Right.
Whatever touring we did. We did a couple of WRVR things and things like that. I remember I was like 17 or 19.
$20 Bill, is that part of an album? Is that?
Yeah, the album is called Livin' Here.
Okay.
And my kids are 18, by the way, so I know of which you're talking about. They're twins, and they groan at my puns. I can't help it. But Livin' Here, I also think, is a very positive kind of pun, because it's about, we spell here HEAR.
Oh, okay.
So it's about living in a sound environment, and a sound environment shaped by all kinds of media nonsense. And needless to say, there's a lot of toxic noise going around. And so filtering through it, interpreting it. I write some of the lyrics. Eric Mingus writes some of the lyrics. Eric and I have been buddies for, how long now? Almost 30 years, writing songs together and gigging and improvising. We just played at Big Ears Festival down in Tennessee on Saturday. We did our duo thing. So Eric and I, we can knock out a record, like 4 hours. Well, 4 hours of recording, 100 hours of post-production.
Of course.
But, we record everything here. I'll work with Don when I can. We'll record live, but a lot of stuff happened during lockdown. And so Don had a friend, Don McKenzie, who's a great drummer that I play with a lot in different situations, in Terraplane, in Bootstrappers, with Melvin Gibbs on bass, where we're doing complete free improv, electric power trio. And there's definitely a little bit of Sonny tribute in that, Sonny and Jimmy. And
sure.
So I'll give Don, I'll ask him for some grooves. He'll make stems for me, some basic grooves, some fills, some wild stuff. And I bring it all into Pro Tools and cut it up and construct it, and then build a song from it, either starting on guitar, sometimes with synthesizer, sometimes with bass. Sometimes I'll bring Dave Hofstra in to do the bass for stuff I've already added, because Dave and I go back to literally him being the very first person I met when I moved to New York City. I was living in Massachusetts for 1 year to recover from 4 years in Buffalo, and I came down on a late bus, got in at Port Authority at 11 p.m., on a Monday night, to my horror, took the subway down to my friend's place. She had a quote unquote a loft on John Street in the financial district. Step over like a dead guy. I thought he was dead anyway. Go into the elevator. Now, one of the reasons I moved to New York was because of No Wave. It was exactly what I was doing then in my last year or so in Buffalo, 77, 78, 76, 77. And when I was in Western Massachusetts, I really loved the Contortions and Lydia India Lunch and DNA, had met the DNA people and the Perubu people in Massachusetts in a band opening for them. So I get into my friend's building, get in the elevator, and there's this guy with a bass and shades, and he says, "Who are you?" And I tell him my name, and I say, "Well, who are you?" It's Dave Hofstra. And I say, "Well, who are you playing with?" And he said, "The Contortions." I said, "Boom, I'm in the right place," And Dave was living one floor above my friend Deb. And Deb was subletting Jody Harris's apartment, the guitarist in the Contortion.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah, so I was hooked in like from day one, and obvious that I had to be there. I wouldn't have minded have been getting there a year earlier, but I was glad I got in when I did.
I'm surprised after 4 years of Buffalo, you didn't end up in Miami for 6 months.
No. Everything I was doing was focused on New York, and I had to get here. There was a reason for this digression. Oh, Dave Hofstra on bass. Okay. Mingus, he'll either come in or he'll record. He has a little setup. He and his wife were living in New Mexico for a while, then they moved back to the east. So he'd either give me vocal tracks to stems that I'd send him, or he'd come in for the day and we'd track here. I have some good mics and good mic preamps, so I can pretty much get any of the sounds I want.
I picked up your new album, Haifa. Is that how you pronounce it? The one on Bandcamp?
Yeah. Hife. It's based on, it was inspired by this book, Entangled Life, by Merlin Sheldrake, who is a mycologist and kind of biological philosopher. His father is a physicist, Rupert Sheldrake, who has a lot of theories that I resonate with. Yeah, so that's a great book.
Well, the record's great too. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you.
And I love Bandcamp. And one of the reasons I thought about having you on, besides all the wealth of material you've done, is specifically to talk about the entrepreneurial musician. Tom and I do that quite a lot now. It's once COVID happened, it opened up the doors, I think, for people versus shutting it down.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, we had no choice.
COVID was, it was incredible. All my teaching, all my touring, it was all done in my studio. I was glad I had my studio to escape, because I felt really bad for the kids stuck without their friends. Terrible.
I think sometimes when my daughter goes to Pratt now, she's a photography major, and sometimes, she and my wife bang heads, and I just look at her, I said, if you spent 15 and 16 sitting in a room and doing nothing but talking on the phone or texting, you'd be a little outside too.
Yeah, totally. I completely sympathize with them. The other thing, though, is the destruction of the music business by Spotify. I mean, Napster started that, but Napster was pretty benign. Yeah. Spotify is like cancer. I mean, it's unfortunate. It's useful. I mean, I'll listen to things on it that I want to hear that I might not have another way of hearing them, but it destroyed the income of so many musicians. And it's getting worse, too. This new business model of them, that if a track gets less than 1,000 streams, they give the money to some already overly wealthy rock star.
Think about the Beatles song Now and Then. Tom, how many downloads did it receive?
Ridiculous amount. But they
ended up with a $42,000 check.
Yeah. Well, talking about the album Living Here, what role does the album play now, Elliott, in the age of streaming?
This is an issue. I mean, it does really feel like everything has returned to singles. I also feel that for people who have the attention span to dig into music more, the album makes a lot of sense. Because I always try to make my albums have a sequence. They have a narrative arc that they pull the listener through. And because most of my work is in Europe and was in Japan, although Japan's economics really took a hit during COVID, and the promoters I work with haven't quite gotten back on their feet again. But Europe is still my main audience, and European audiences understand music in a way that Americans don't. They still have this deep attention and this deep love of music and throw themselves into it and want long concerts. You feel like when I moved to New York, when I was first playing at places like Mud Club and Tier 3, you were supposed to do a 20-minute set. And I'd go out into the USA and play a 20-minute. They'd go, what are you doing? Come on, play some music. Because I know, man, I'm a New Yorker. We play 20-minute sets.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely
And before that, I was used to, like 45 on, 15 off, 4 sets a night,
Yeah, that's where I grew up in. When you talk about South Florida, David, I was in the top 40 for how we made a living. I worked my way through college, and then I get up to New York, and I only have like a half-hour set. I'm like, well, we just got the sound together, 35 minutes.
The one thing that was good about that short set is you learn to hit right from the beginning. It's like you have to, otherwise people don't care.
Well, you mentioned Europe again. When David and I speak to British artists, some of whom I mentioned, a music education is part of their daily life. It's part of their curriculum, just like we take math and English and
Absolutely.
So yes, it's not surprising that Europe has much deeper appreciation, even for the music that we create.
Even the fact that everybody there speaks multiple languages, it's like incredible. I mean, it's the old joke about what do you call someone who speaks one language? American.
American. We know all about David. Tell them about Empower Through Music, where you're bringing.
I guess for the last couple of years, I've been bringing music programs into the New York City schools. At about 6 years ago, the principals got a new contract, negotiated a new contract, and all of the arts money would be commingled with all their other money, i.e., we don't have to have a music program.
Exactly.
We'll buy computers. What's always frustrated me is all these folks had music when they were growing up, and whether they see the connection or not, or they choose not to, that's what happens. I mean, I was 7 years old. They gave me a clarinet. I just started. Granted, I was playing piano since I was 3, but this is what you do.
We lived in Berlin for a year and a half. Then it was fantastic. And my son was playing trumpet in school and my daughter viola. And we came back and they were in School of the Future for middle school. No music program. What does that tell you about the future? When something the future has no music.
Well, it depends on whose future they're talking about. You know what I mean?
Well, see, the problem with music education is the students develop other skills, David, such as critical thinking, analytical thinking, and then they might question authority if they do that.
Yeah.
We have to be careful.
Music, because it embodies alternative pathways. It changes the way you think.
There's so many studies. Absolutely. They look at brain of musicians. It's interesting. They look at kids' brains who are musicians, adult brains. They look at what an improvising musician's brain looks like. Exactly. It's a remarkable thing.
Hopefully without taking it out of their skull.
Oh, no, they have to do that. David, what have they found in the brain of bass players?
They find that there's a great deal of porno on this side of the brain. All right. The Schillinger system is back here somewhere.
Something like that. But getting back to the entrepreneurial aspects of your career, I mean, you created work that is considered outside the mainstream, yet you've enjoyed an artistically and commercially successful career, relatively.
It's feast or famine.
Feast or famine, right. Well, welcome. What isn't? It leads me to believe that maybe the mainstream is the wrong place to look at it when it finds success in an artist. A good example of that is the Grateful Dead. Now, the establishment always considered them to be underground, on the fringe, psychedelic, which was another word for experimental. But when you step back and look at their history, they played to more of an audience in their 30-some-odd year existence than most pop stars. And the surviving members of the band are still filling stadiums with everyone from 20 to 80 years old, which they are now. And their offspring, such as Fish and 311 and Dave Matthews, they play to huge audiences. So maybe the mainstream isn't what we're led to believe it is.
Right.
Your career exemplifies that, I see.
It's such a big world. I think anyone can find a constituency if they can figure out how to get their thing out there. And there were moments when whatever you want to call the mainstream was more receptive. I mean, there was like a time I was on the cover of New York Magazine. I was on Dave Sanborn's show Night Music. Really felt like things were opening up. And then I felt like they kind of shut down again. A lot of the problem, in my view, was that when arts organizations, instead of having artists do the curating and running things, began to have people who studied the business of arts management running things. So then the bottom line became the factor that determined how an art or an artist would be disseminated. They say, well, we can sell this many tickets for this person and 2/3 with that person. So let's go with the one that sells more tickets.
Demographics, yes, right.
Yeah,
right.
And
it seems like that's become the way of the world at this point. The so-called bean counters, and Spotify is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, at its worst. At the same time, if you can be persistent, and I'm pretty disciplined in my work habits. I'm kind of a workaholic. So I allot a certain amount of time to social media, putting stuff out on Instagram, and it gets results. We're not measuring it in Beyonce terms, but there is definitely some attention paid and things have the potential. And I think working with Delmark the one thing about this record is it's more consistently, I hate to use the word accessible.
Nothing wrong with being accessible.
No, but
I know what you mean.
It implies a certain calculation. But the songs here, I was very concerned that the surface was appealing and how the music was presented. There's a couple of tracks that are pretty out. Eric wrote this great poem called I Dreamed I Saw Sun Ra last night. That's probably the most out track on the record. And I'm really happy because it has humor and beauty and some wildness to it. And a lot of the other tracks, I mean, the thing is with Don on drums, the groove is deep. Don is a fantastic drummer. He played in Vernon Reed's Mask. Also, that's how I first met Don. He was playing
Oh,
with
okay.
Vernon. And,
I'm doing stuff with Calvin Weston at this point,
oh, great.
and I love his playing.
Oh, no, Calvin's a monster. Yeah,
And such a great spirit.
totally, totally.
But accessibility, that's how you get people into the tent.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And then David and I were speaking with Chuck Israels last week talking about his book, Bass Notes, and Chuck is not a fan of, let's say, electric jazz. David explained to him how that record up there, Bitches Brew, inspired him to look backwards to kind of Blue, Birth of the Cool. And then I'm a few years younger than David, so when Miles came back in the 80s and did You're Under Arrest, We Want Miles, that made me go back to Bitches Brew. And then Bitches Brew made me go back to Kind of Blue. So it's a generational thing.
Absolutely.
Somebody has to open the door. Even though Miles was doing what was considered commercial, God forbid Miles Davis had a hit record, it still opened the door. And he still did great work such as Tutu and Aura and things like that. But it introduced my generation to Miles.
No, totally. Totally. I mean, I got into it from the wild screaming avant-garde and the electric jazz. And now one of my favorite things to listen to is Duke Ellington's 1927 to 29 recordings. To me, they're as out and as beautiful and as powerful as any. And you hear in Cecil Taylor's music, huge amount of Duke Ellington. And Cecil used to talk about Duke a lot. We got to hang out together. Don and I did a record with Cecil, which is unfortunately sitting in limbo because of disputes over who's going to be the executor of his estate. So I'm hoping that gets cleared up and we can release it. It's Cecil mostly reading his poetry over our electric, kind of grooves.
I was reading a book just recently, and there was a lot of Cecil talked a lot about his poetry in that book. I don't remember the name of the book. Tom, was it for one of the people we were speaking to?
I can't remember either. We read too many books.
Well, it might have been the guy who did the Albert Eiler book.
Yes, I think that's where, the Albert Eiler, the biographer,
Okay, well, I've took that up. I haven't read the Eiler book.
Getting onto the subject of technology, now you've always embraced technology. David and I play an instrument that wasn't quite accepted, right, David? That electric bass over there, that's not a real bass.
Oh, you mean that toothpick over there?
That toothpick over there, right. And of course,
see, Tom always puts his bass in the picture. I leave it to the imagination.
Okay.
Oh, that is nice. What is that?
A luthier up in Connecticut named Frank Brocklehurst built this for me. It's 36-inch scale, low B to high C, just a volume knob, no Hazarai in
just
it.
A piezo? It's just one.
No, just that semi-hollow and with a D tuner on the back of the B so I can go down to a low A.
Nice.
Which is a wonderful tone.
Yes, I can imagine.
Not if you live in an apartment building, David.
Who can tell if it's in an apartment?
My dog's back over there. She's, just waiting for the moment I turn it on and.
Well, on the topic of technology, I mean, I remember when the DX7 came out. That was nice. You could bring orchestral arrangements to a small club like the Bitter End. Pro Tools, as you know, turned bedrooms into recording studios, right? You don't have to go to Abbey Road to make a record. And now everyone is in a kerfuffle about this thing called AI, artificial intelligence.
Well, first of all, it isn't I. No, I call it authentic stupidity. The thing is, what AI is a very fast database with some predictional capabilities based on the statistics of how many things match certain criteria.
Right.
It is not intelligent. I've used it as a visual artist for album covers and for posters and just for some fun. Everything I've heard sonically with it is pretty terrible. Now, I've used it in a different way. I have an opera that was commissioned by Beethoven at 250. It's a science fiction opera in a way, premiered in Germany in 2021. It was supposed to be 2020 for the Beethoven 250th anniversary, and it's going to get premiered in June at Roulette in Brooklyn. And I based all of the music on Beethoven's Grosse Fuge, his last piece. And the premise of the opera is that Beethoven, he was a pretty disturbed man, especially in his later years between his deafness. He had all kinds of, he was bitter. He was, let's say, psychosexually in need of help. He possibly had syphilis. He used to wake up, used to dip his head in cold water, in ice water. People thought they may have contributed to some of his problems. He would go into fugue states. And in the opera, one of his fugue states or multiple fugue states bring him into our era, where he sees both the beauty and the horror of the modern world, the technology and the events, the massive carnage, the incredible scientific discoveries, both microscopic and astronomical. And then, inspired by that, he goes back to write the Grosse Fuge. And so I took Beethoven's Grosse Fuge and I took strands of melodic and harmonic material, and using algorithms to randomize and permutate these elements, I then created new music based on them. So you can hear, if you focus hard on it, you can hear some of the original Beethoven DNA in it, rhythmically especially. So I kept some of those rhythmic motives, which is almost like a shuffle, in the Grosse Fuge. And he also did some ragtime in his piano sonatas. Incredible composer. Anyway, so I used some of these things as tools. I think as tools are great, as things that are going to replace human creativity. Why? There's nothing like human creativity. It will do things because human intelligence is not a mechanical device. Computers, no matter how fast, are still binary devices. They go to a point in an information change and it's yes or no, on or off, plus or minus, 0 or 1, binary. It's never going to be curved. And that's how our intelligence works. Our synapses require like a consensus among a lot of different electrochemical factors for them to go into a decision mode and then say, yes, this is what's going to happen. And a lot of it is unpredictable. And I'm thinking now that, we have nanotubules in our nervous system that are light sensitive. So they could be quantum sensitive. So we could be interfacing with the whole quantum computer that is the universe. I like to say it's only a probability that we are here. It's a very good probability that we are here now and we will continue to be here for the next conceivable amount of time, because how long have we been here on Earth? For humans, maybe in our current form, 70,000 years.
Right.
Planet Earth, maybe 5 billion years. But when you're looking at an infinite scale, that's just a tiny blip.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting because when you really look, our probability, and unless somebody fucks it up, we could definitely be here longer.
Yeah. Well, those people that could fuck it up, though, they are a real danger. And
at this point in time, absolutely. You use Pro Tools, and Dana Stevens, we were talking to him a couple weeks back. Apparently there's this new program within Pro Tools. Tom, do you remember that? Something about an AI mix or an AS mix, because it's now, stupidity. But are you familiar with that?
I'm using Pro Tools 9, an ancient version, because my studio computer won't go past Mac OS 10.6.8. So this is like an ancient machine. I can't stand the new business model that Avid Pro Tools uses, which is you only rent your software.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. So as long as the system works, I see my studio machine as a box that does Pro Tools, and I do a few other things in it. My laptop is up to date, and I'm using the latest Ableton, and that has some predictive things and quote unquote AI things, and I'll experiment with them. I'll experiment with anything. It's just the idea that human creativity is going to, the idea, the business model is that humans will be reduced to drudgery and support so that the AIs can do all the fun creative work.
Well, look at, right. You're exactly right in the sense that look at now manufacturing jobs left this country a long time ago. Now we're seeing tech jobs being exported, and all the administrative and creative work, well, it can be done by AI. So You're right. That leaves us to do the drudgery. I see the technology, as you allude to, as a tool. Okay. I mean, I can use it creatively. I think it would be fabulous, like you say, to Duke Ellington, to go back and AI his recordings and make them enhance the quality of some of those recordings.
Although I have to say, with a single microphone, those recordings sound incredible.
Isn't that something?
It's amazing, the vividness of the string bass, and that's a hard instrument to record. But I wish there were pictures, because with the way they used to do it was the musicians would be placed around the room in different proximities to the single microphone, and they'd have a good room, and that's how they'd get it to sound right. They'd move everybody.
Well, you think about Gannett Sound out in Indiana. Hold on, there's a train coming through in about 2 minutes. We can't.
Did you ever read Peter Guralnick's book, Sweet Soul Music?
Yes, I did.
That's a fantastic book. And when he's talking about interviewing them, I can't remember their names, who had high studios where they did all those stacks of old things. It was in an old movie theater. They didn't have a desk with any EQ. They had a few good mics. They had all the controls taped over on the bass and guitar amps. They had marks on the floor where they told the horn players to stand and everything. And if something needed adjustment, they'd move the mic an inch or two, and those records.
I'm reading a book now. We're doing this off Joseph Kaplan, and it's called Three Shades of Blue. They're talking about how Miles, when he had the Harmon in his trumpet, would get a little closer to the mic. And when he took it out, he said, I got to stand back a few feet and such. So we're talking the 50s. This isn't really that long ago. And I agree with you. I think you're going to ruin the sound of a Duke Ellington or a King Oliver record by cleaning it up. Part of the beauty is the going on. There's something romantic about that.
Guys in a room, like you can almost smell the sweat and the booze and whatever else.
I have an old 78 machine, and I love listening to some of the records on that. There's a quality that you cannot reproduce. Getting back to AI for a second, it's like that old computer song, garbage in, garbage out. But you've got to be the person to either put the garbage in or the good stuff in. This
is the problem with people who are programming AI. Who are they and what are their concerns and priorities? And who's paying their salary? And what do the people who are paying their salary expect and want? Because you look at this world, I don't want to rant. I tend towards ranting a lot.
Please rant. Yes, we have.
But you look at the wealth concentrated in just a few hands, and then you see how many people. It wouldn't take that much money for everybody to have a place to live and education and food to eat. It just wouldn't take very much. These people would still be the richest people on the planet, and they would have done something great for humanity, because how much crime and war is caused by people not having a thing that they need.
Bombs in baseball stadiums. So
you have to think in terms of who's pulling their string. That's to me more important than the tech people. Well, it was interesting. I was watching, I don't remember which one it was, but one of the guys said, I never let my kids use what I'm creating.
Was it Bill Gates? I think it might have even been Bill Gates.
I think you're right.
It wasn't him, it was someone else. Not that Bill Gates probably isn't doing the similar thing.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the jury is still out. You can see all the damage that AI can do, yet yes, it can be a useful tool for musicians, as you demonstrated. I thought it was really cool what Paul and Ringo did with the John Lennon demo. I mean, it's not the greatest Beatles song, but it brought a lot of happiness, so that's a good. I don't think it'll be up there with.
But it's also proof that if you don't have something good, even after you're done with it, it's still not good.
Right. Right. So,
well, at least it didn't supplant the human element. It was a useful prosthetic, you could say.
Yeah.
So. As long as we can maintain that relationship. Rudy Rucker is a science fiction writer and mathematician whose work I like. He's no longer with us, sadly, but he wrote a bunch of books, I think, called Wetware, Software, maybe Hardware, about the future. They're very lighthearted. They're like Terminator, but much more humorous. The future between the humans and the robots, with the AI, the robot just seeking to have their sentience recognized, being allowed to have their own lives, essentially. They're great books.
We'll have to have you back on the show when feedback comes out.
Yeah, it would be great. Pleasure meeting you both and talking with you.
Absolutely. Elliott, last but not least, could you do a PSA for us?
Absolutely.
My name is Elliott Sharp, and you're listening to Notes.
No, you're Tom Semioli.
No, I'm
get it right.
We were going to call you G.
No, the AI has decided that he's...
Well, I was telling Tom earlier, should I call you by your enharmonic equivalent? Should I just call you F?
Well, in fact, Charlie Kyle, who I mentioned before, who's your neighbor in Connecticut, that was what he used to call me all the time.
Oh, that's funny. And Tom brought up, maybe we should call you G double flat.
Yeah, G double flat. I think
that's before coffee.
Anyway. Okay, Elliott, come on, let's get a PSA.
This is Elliott Sharp here for Notes from an Artist.
Thank you.
Very good, Elliott. There you go.
Will this be, this isn't live, is it?
No, absolutely not. This will be a podcast and a radio broadcast. We'll send you the link.
Yeah, great.
It'll be the 15th.
So file your taxes and listen to Elliott.
That's it. You know what? We'll use that in the intro.
Okay. See, tax day isn't so bad.
I've got a wealth of material, so we're going to have a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
So what we end up doing, we do the radio show. It's broadcast on the Monday night. And then that midnight, which would be Tuesday, we release the podcast on all platforms. And we have a separate playlist that people can click on and they can listen to all
Elliott,
Elliott
do you have
Sharp.
any suggestions for your playlist? I mean, obviously we'll play the new single, $20 Bill. Any other things you?
I'll choose some things from past Terraplane records.
Oh, great.
And a couple of tracks from the new record with Mingus, Songs from a Rogue State.
Perfect.
Excellent, Dave. Excellent. It's all over.
I'll send you guys both downloads of it.
Oh, great. Fabulous. Thanks so much.
That'd be great.
All right,
Great.
Elliott, be well. Great talking to you.
And you. Thanks. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.
David, what a great conversation with Elliott.
We certainly got down and deep. I'm really appreciative that he was able to spend some time with us. And not only will we have him back to do some of his classical and avant-garde leanings, but he's got a new book, Feedback, coming out. And we're going to have to talk about that one as well.
Yes, we like to read books. David, tell us about the playlist you have curated.
Oh, this is a really eclectic mix of stuff. We're going to start off with a tune by Sonny Chirac, move into Anthony Braxton territory, and then jump all the way back to Robert Johnson. A couple of tracks by Elliott and Eric Mingus, some Yardbirds, Muddy Waters, Hubert Sumlin, a bunch of tracks from Terraplane, something he did with the Cronus Quartet, something he told us about, a guy who in the 50s started doing distorted guitar. His name is Pat Hare, who I actually had never heard of, Othar Turner and the Fife and Drum Band. And man, what a great set of music.
What an eccentric, eclectic collection of songs. So thank you once again, Elliott Sharp, for being on the show. Again, we will have Elliott back because there's just so much more to his career than the blues. My name is Tom Semioli. Thanks for listening. And you, sir?
I'm David Gross, and we're going to see you next week. And we've got something extra special next week. And that is we have Mr. Ja Wobble, 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 wobble.
Say that again. Jaw wobble, 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 jaw wobble. Fascinating conversation with the former John Wardell. Okay, peace out. See you next week.
Bye-bye.